Heat shimmers above the baked clay as the sun drags its dying light across the high desert. Wind rattles the charred spokes of a wagon that will never roll again. Scattering flakes of soot like black snow, a little girl kneels in the dust beside the scorched ruin, her small fingers stroking the stiff brown curls of the woman sprawled at her knees. Sofia Alvarez is 10, barefoot. Her dress torn at the shoulder where a bullet ripped through cloth and missed flesh by a breath. 2 days of silence have hollowed her voice. Thirst has glued her tongue to the roof of her mouth. She rocks forward and back, whispering the rosary in faltering Spanish. Each Ave Maria fainter than the last. Buzzards spiral in lazy loops overhead. Patient shadows waiting for the living to give up. A distant shape wavers on the horizon line. Emerging from the heat ripples the way ghosts rise out of campfire tales, whose drum a slow heartbeat into the ground. Dust swirls round a rider clothed in sun-bleached leather, coat tail snapping. When he reins in, the horse snorts and stamps. Uneasy at the scent of death, the man sits motionless for a breath, studying the broken wagon, the blackened trail of footprints, the silent child cradling her mother. His face is carved from fatigue and old war's cheek scarred, stubble silvering at the jaw, but his eyes are clear and sharp, the color of distant storm clouds gathering. He swings down without a word, boots crunching through brittle sage. The canteen he unhooks is battered tin. Water sloshes softly inside. He sets it on the ground 3 paces from the girl, as though approaching a skittish fawn. Sofia stares, pupils huge with exhaustion. Lashes crusted white with dust, her fingers tighten on the rosary. She tries to rise. Sudden panic flickering must protect Mama. Must run out, the world tilts, and she sags onto her heels. The stranger stoops, slides the canteen closer. Sunlight catches the long scar that curves from his temple to the edge of his beard, a relic of some forgotten blade. He waits. The only sound is the wind combing through dry grass. Sofia drags the canteen to her chest, unscrews the cap with trembling hands, and drinks too fast. Cool water explodes across her throat, lining, and she coughs, choking, but keeps swallowing until her stomach cramps. When she lifts her gaze again, the man has already stripped his gloves and is kneeling beside the woman's body. He checks for pulse, though there is none, then closes the staring eyes with a gentleness that splits Sofia's heart. He doesn't cross himself, doesn't speak a prayer. Perhaps he forgot how, but he lifts the corpse with surprising reverence and carries it to a patch of soft earth near a lone cottonwood whose leaves rattle like sea. Ons. His shovel bites the soil in deliberate rhythm. Sweat darkens the back of his shirt. Dust clings to his forearms. Sofia rises now, unsteady, and totters after him. She watches the ground deepen, watches her mother lowered into its curve. Quilt wrapped tight, the stranger pauses, head bowed, one hand resting on the plank of the cross he has fashioned from wagon debris. He mutters something to low language, then drives the cross upright at the head of the grave. Only then does he meet Sofia's eyes. She flinches but doesn't run. He points to himself, colder. A single word cracked like dry timber then. Knots the rosary round her wrist, as if to anchor her to the living. The buzzards glide away. Cheated Dot Calder rises, returns to the wagon, salvages a singed blanket, and folds it across the saddle. With a slow, questioning motion he extends his hands. Sophie hesitates. The sky behind him is more red than gold now. Night will drop cold and swift, and she will not survive it alone. She nods once. He lifts her as if she weighs nothing, settles her sideways in the saddle, tucks the blanket round her feet. Her eyelids flutter. The horse turns, and the grave falls behind them, marked by a cross that seems both impossibly small and wide as the world. They ride west first, chasing the last warmth of day. Then angle north where Calder knows are half ruined. Mission offers walls against coyotes and night winds. Sophia drifts between waking and sleep, cheek pressed to the horse's mane, the rosary beads clicking softly with each step. When a chill tremor grips her, Calder shifts the duster from his own shoulders and drapes it over her like a tent. She feels the thump of his heart against her spine, steady and unhurried, as if nothing in this desert can surprise him anymore. Stars bloom overhead, coyotes yip in the distance. But the rhythm of hooves drowns them. Sophia's breaths lengthen, though every few minutes her body jerks. In a half-dream she is still hearing gunshots. Mama's final gasp. Calder's hand comes to rest lightly on her forearm, not restraining, just reminding her she is no longer alone. He says nothing. Words have edges. Silence can let a wound breathe. Long hours later, the silhouette of adobe walls rises against moonlight. Calder dismounts, lifts Sophia, and sets her on cool stone. He gathers tumbleweed, strikes flint, coaxes a cautious flame. She watches him over the fire's shoulder, studying the way he scans shadowed corners before he allows himself to sit. He unwraps jerky from old cloth, tears it into smaller pieces, hands one to her. Salt stings cracked lips, but hunger outweighs pain. She chews, swallows, accepts the tin cup of water he offers. Calder leans against the wall, one knee drawn, up, hat brim masking his eyes. He seems carved out of the same desert as the bones of the mission, a man who's been here forever and might remain after wind erases even the tracks of the dead wagon. Sophia finishes the jerky, pulls the blanket tighter, and studies the dance of firelight on the cracked plaster. Outside, an owl calls a mournful note that floats across the ruin like incense. Minutes pass, then an hour. When the embers settle into a quiet glow, Calder's breathing deepens. Sophia's own eyelids droop, but fear flares, jerking her awake. What if he leaves? What if the men who killed her mother return? She forces words through swollen throat, the first English she's uttered since tragedy struck. Where we go. She whispers, Calder's eyes open. Great ships in the firelight. He considers, then answers with a voice low and hoarse, north. The single syllable carries the promise of distance from horror. Maybe even mercy. Sophia nods and lays her head on folded arms. Sleep finds her at last, heavy and dreamless, while a stranger with scarred hands keeps watch against the dark. Morning will bring sun and dust again, questions unspoken, and the long road toward a mesa hidden beyond ragged cliffs. But for this fragile span of us, a silent cowboy and a broken child share the uncertain peace of survivors who have not yet decided whether hope is worth the weight. Trust, it turns out, is born not in declarations but in the small fact of still being alive together when dawn edges over the desert rim. The desert unfolded like a cracked parchment, each mile whispering heat and silence. They rode through it together. Sophia slumped forward in the saddle, her small fingers tangled in the horse's mane. And Calder behind her, silent, steady, watchful. The sky stretched out endless and pale, the land so dry it seemed to swallow sound. On the second day, the wind shifted. It carried with it the scent of sand and storm. And Calder's eyes narrowed toward the horizon. They stopped in the shade of a large rock outcrop to water the horse and rest. Calder poured a small amount into Sophia's cupped hands. Her lips were cracked, dust caked, but her eyes had begun to open wider, soaking in each movement, each sign that she was no longer alone. She didn't ask where they were going this time. She only looked up at him with a quiet kind of patience. They pressed on. The sandstorm hit just before dusk. A wall of yellow-brown roared across the plains like a beast unleashed. Calder wrapped Sophia in the blanket and pulled his coat over her head, pressing her against his chest as they huddled behind the horse for cover. Wind howled. Sand pelted them in sharp stings. Calder didn't speak. His body became a shelter, a barrier between her and the worst of it. When the wind died, they emerged covered in grit, coughing. Calder rubbed sand from Sophia's face with a damp cloth and handed her a strip of dried beans wrapped in canvas. She nibbled it slowly while he checked the horses' hoofs and murmured a wordless reassurance. They rode through twilight toward a silhouette in the distance, a shattered steeple poking from dunes. The ruins of a mission offered cracked adobe walls and part of a roof inside. Calder cleared a corner of lizards and scorpions and started a small fire. Sophia curled against the warm earth, eyes heavy, but her voice broke the quiet at last. "What's your name?" she asked softly. He glanced up, pausing as he stirred the coals. Calder, she nodded like it fit somehow. "Where we goin'?" He took his time, then said the same word he'd offered before. "North." Sophia accepted that answer. She didn't know why she trusted him, but in the days since her world had been torn open, Calder hadn't left her. That meant something. In the morning, the desert greeted them again with unrelenting heat. They rode with the wind in their faces round noon. Calder pulled the horse to a stop and raised his hand. Ahead, a rattler lay coiled in their path, sun-drunk but alert. Sophie leaned forward to look just as the snake hissed and struck. A gunshot cracked. The rattler flopped, its body twitching in the dust. Head blown away. Calder holstered his pistol and looked back at her. She blinked hard, her pulse racing. He stepped down, cut the skin from the snake with swift, practiced motions. Later that evening, he roasted a piece over fire. When he handed it to her, she hesitated. "Snake." He nodded. "Good meat." She sniffed it, took a bite, and chewed with reluctant curiosity. The salt helped. She handed the rest back and watched him eat his piece in silence. When the stars rose, Calder pointed up, not at anything specific, just a slow drift of constellations that moved above them like ships on an invisible river. "That one?" Sophia asked. He nodded again. "Coyote Star." He didn't say more, but she held the image close. She liked the idea of a trickster watching over them from the sky. By the third day, they were both worn thin. The nights had gotten colder, and Calder's limp became more noticeable. Sophia noticed him favoring one side when he dismounted, his jaw clenched tighter than usual. He didn't complain, but she watched him more closely. That night, while he sat wrapping his ankle in cloth, she quietly pulled a flat rock beneath his saddle to raise his leg. Calder looked down at it, then at her. A flicker of surprise passed through his eyes, then something softer. He didn't speak. He only nodded once and shifted his weight with a grunt of approval. Later, she lay under his coat again, staring at the dark sky while he sat, keeping watch. Her voice came thin, almost too soft to carry. "Did you have a girl?" He didn't answer. After a while, she added, "You're sad. Like me." Calder's jaw twitched. His gaze stayed on the fire. There were no stories, but in the lines of his face and the pause in his breath, she read enough. He had loved someone once, a wife, maybe a child. Whatever life he had before, the war or the fire or whatever came after had burned it to the ground. That night, as the fire died low, he pulled something from his pocket, a silver locket, tarnished but intact. He opened it, looked for a moment, and then placed it back in his coat. He thought she was asleep. She wasn't. The next afternoon, the train changed. Red rocks jutted up in spires. Cliffs rose round them like sleeping giants. They turned into a narrow canyon that opened onto a mesa-high ground, ringed in scrub and solitude. A cabin sat perched on its edge, old but standing, a fence marked where cattle might roam, though there were none now. The windmill creaked as it spun. squealing on rusted bearings. There was a well, a corral, and beyond it, nothing. But Skydot Calder dismounted, helped Sophia down, and let her walk the last few yards herself. This was his home. It smelled of dust and pine. The cabin door opened with a low groan. Inside, there was a pot-belly stove, a cot with a wool blanket, a table and 2 chairs, a shelf with worn books and half-filled bottles. Calder began gathering wood while Sophia stepped softly through the room, fingers grazing old things, lanterns, saddle soap, a child's carved toy tucked behind a box. She said nothing, but something inside her shifted. She knew this place had once held Lefter. Now it held them. That night, Calder cooked beans over the stove and gave her the larger portion. She didn't argue. Afterward, he cleaned his rifle, checked the locks on the door and window, and set a shotgun beside his bed. Sophia curled up in a corner with the blanket pulled high. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside the cabin was warm. Before she drifted off, she whispered, "Thank you." Calder didn't reply, but he looked over from where he sat near the fire, and in the flicker of lamplight, something like peace ghosted across his face, brief and unsure, but real. He didn't know yet if he could protect her from what came next, but tonight she was safe, and that was enough. The sun was high, burning white across the mesa when Sophia spotted it. Calder had rolled up his sleeves to split wood outside the cabin, and as he bent to lift another log, the fabric pulled back to reveal a faint, seared brand on the inside. Of his wrist twisted, faded, but unmistakable, a horseshoe shape, split down the middle. Her stomach turned to ice. She knew that mark. The man who shot her mother had the same one burned into his skin. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She stood at the cabin door, eyes fixed on the mark as if it might leap off his skin and bite her. He noticed her stare, froze, and slowly rolled the sleeve down again. He didn't offer an explanation, didn't rush to defend himself. Her voice cracked like brittle glass. "You were with them?" Calder didn't move. "You were with them?" she screamed, the sound tearing through the stillness like a storm breaking open the sky. He didn't answer, just turned his face slightly away. As if accepting the blow, Sophia grabbed the water canteen and the shotgun and bolted. The trail down the mesa was steep and unfamiliar, but she didn't care. Panic blistered her thoughts. The image of her mother bleeding in the dirt surged forward, along with the sneering face of the man who pulled the trigger. Calder had been kind, silent, steady at that brand. He was one of them, or he used to be. She didn't stop until her legs gave out. She collapsed in the shade of a lone juniper, chest heaving, heart thudding against her ribs like a caged animal. The desert stretched out in every direction. The world had grown quiet again. Too quiet. Then came the howl. Low and sharp. Wolves. She scrambled to her feet and turned, but she couldn't remember the way back. The sun had moved. Everything looked the same. Her breathing grew faster. Sweat stung her eyes. The howling came again. This time closer. 3 of them, shapes just beyond the rocks. They watched her, tongues lolling, amber eyes blinking slow. Her hands fumbled the shotgun. She had no idea how to use it properly. She aimed, finger trembling, but no shot came. Her grip faltered. One wolf took a step forward. Then a gunshot cracked from behind. The wolf yelped and bolted. The others scattered. Sophia turned to see Calder, breath ragged, rifle in one hand, eyes dark with something unreadable. He limped as he approached, favoring his bad leg, but he didn't stop. She backed away from him, arms tight to her chest. "You," she choked. "You lied." He said nothing. She pointed at his wrist. "That mark, I saw it on the men who killed her." His voice came low, The first words in ours. They gave it to me before I ran. She stared at him. I rode with them once. Didn't know what they were. Thought they were just tough men. Working the frontier. One night, they set fire to a family's wagon while I slept. Shot a baby in the dark. I left before dawn. Her breath caught in her throat. I tried to stop them. He added. They burned my arm when I said no. He opened his sleeve again, showed the brand up close. It had been burned, but then cut across, like someone trying to erase it. I ain't. Them, he said, but I didn't stop them. Not in time. Sophia dropped the shotgun. It hit the dirt softly. Calder reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch from it. He took a folded square of cloth, her mother's rosary, cleaned and wrapped in care. He held it out. She took it with shaking hands. They didn't speak after that. Not that night. Not as they walked back in silence, stars blooming overhead like 1,000 old ghosts. When they returned to the cabin, Calder lit the lamp and sat at the table, his shoulders lower than she had ever seen them. Sophia put the rosary beside his hand and sat across from him. She didn't know what forgiveness looked like. But this was the beginning of something close. The next morning, word came from the postman who sometimes passed by the lower ridge. There had been another wagon attack, this time a family from Sonora. Burned just like hers. The men were led by a former soldier turned outlaw named Silas Knox. That name meant nothing to Sophia. But Calder's jaw went hard. He's back. Calder muttered. He went outside, checked the wire around the corral, reinforced the cabin door, and counted ammunition. He began digging pits and covering them with loose canvas. He strung tin cans across the trees with string. Wind chimes made for war. Sophia followed him, helping where she could. She didn't ask why he moved with such purpose. She understood. Silas wasn't finished, and this time, Calder wouldn't run. By evening, a man appeared just beyond the edge of the trees. Tall, lean, with a hawk feather tied to his braid and a rifle slung across his back. He didn't say a word, just nodded toward Calder. Sophia watched from the cabin window as Calder approached the stranger and clasped his wrist. The man was Navajo. His name was Red Moon. Calder told Sophia only this, years ago. He had saved Red Moon's sister from a soldier's bullet. Now Red Moon had come to settle the debt. He barely spoke. But he saw everything, moved like wind between the trees. They shared no war stories, no grand plans. Calder and Red Moon worked quietly, dug new trenches, laid tripwires, sharpened blades. They didn't look at each other much, but they understood each other the way men who've both seen death often do. That night, Sophia lay on the cot, watching Calder carve notches into a small wooden block, one for every day she'd stayed. She'd never asked why. Now, she thought she knew. He was counting something precious, maybe a second chance. Red Moon came to the door then, silent as dusk. He pointed west, 3 riders, distant silhouettes on the ridge, just watching. Calder stood. It was beginning again. But this time, they wouldn't be running. The fire crackled low, throwing soft shadows against the cabin walls. Outside, the wind had stilled. No coyotes called, no insects hummed. Just silence, heavy and expectant. Calder sat at the table, sharpening his knife with long, slow strokes. Red Moon stood by the window, eyes scanning the black tree line. Sophia crouched by the stove, adding another log, watching both men. The tension in the room wasn't fear, it was clarity. A quiet knowing that dawn would bring something no one could walk away from unchanged. Calder reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the rosary. It had been cleaned again, the beads glinting softly in the firelight. He held it out to Sophia, across the table. She looked at it, then at him. "You should keep it," she said gently. He shook his head. "It was hers. It's yours." She took it slowly, the weight of it warm in her palm. She hesitated, then walked over to him. Carefully, she slipped the rosary round his wrist. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said. Calder looked up. For a moment, his scarred face softened. A flicker of something long buried stirred behind his eyes. He gave a nod, not of agreement, but of understanding. They got to work. Calder strung tripwires across the perimeter, each line connected to shotgun shells wedged into barrels or hidden underbrush. Red Moon climbed to the high rocks, bow in hand, choosing a spot where the mesa opened wide. Sophia helped reinforce the cabin door, nailed shutters shut, stacked firewood in a V-shaped barrier that would funnel intruders toward the traps. She had never loaded a rifle before that night. Calder showed her once, then handed it over. By the time the sky began to pale, they were ready. 5 shapes emerged through the morning mist. Horses crunching over frost-stiff ground. Silas Knox rode at the center, black coat whipping behind him, pistol in hand. His face hadn't aged a day, in Sophia's memory still cruel, still smiling as if none of it had ever been real. His men fanned out behind him, rifles drawn. They didn't expect the first explosion. One rider veered into the tripwire. His horse screamed as the barrel detonated. He flew sideways, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos followed. Gunfire shattered the stillness. Smoke bloomed across the field. Calder fired from the porch, steady despite the rifle kick. One of Silas's men fell. Red Moon let an arrow fly. From the cliff, clean, precise, silent. A third man crumpled. Sophia crouched behind a stack of logs, hard hammering. When the fourth man charged, she rose and aimed the rifle. Her hands trembled. She squeezed the trigger. The man spun, dropped. Her stomach lurched. But she didn't stop. Then silence. It was too quiet. Silas had disappeared. Calder stepped forward, scanning the horizon, and that's when the shot rang out. He staggered back, blood blooming through his shirt. Just below the ribs, Sophia screamed. Red Moon shouted from above, but the sound was swallowed by wind. Silas emerged from behind the cabin, revolver trained on Calder, who knelt in the dirt now. One hand pressed to the wound, the other clutching the rosary. "You just can't stay out of the way, can you?" Silas sneered, always playing the saint. "You remember that wagon we lit up in El Paso? Thought you could save that little baby? Thought you'd do better next time?" Calder said nothing. His breathing was ragged, but his eyes clear, calm, full of something deeper than hate. Never left Silas. Silas raised the pistol. A gunshot cracked the stillness. But it wasn't his. Silas jerked forward, mouth open, then dropped to his knees. Behind him, Sophia stood with Calder's revolver shaking in both hands. Her face was pale, lips pressed together, eyes dry. She didn't blink. Silas fell. Dust swirled, then settled. Calder exhaled a slow, broken breath and let himself fall back. Red Moon climbed down from the rocks, knelt beside him. Sophia dropped the revolver and rushed to Calder's side. His blood soaked the earth. The rosary lay across his wrist. "You did good." Calder whispered, "Real good." Sophia held his hand. "You're not going to die." He smiled faintly, the first smile she'd ever seen on him. "Don't lie to me now." He murmured, "Truth is, I was already gone. You gave me something I lost." She shook her head, tears coming now. "Unstoppable. Don't go, please. Don't go." Calder looked up at the sky. It was blue, open, wide. "Keep this place," he said. "Make it something better." And then he was still. Wind whispered through the grass. Red Moon stood, bowed his head, and stepped back. Later, after the bodies were buried, after Calder's grave was dug beside her mother's under the cottonwood tree, Sophia sat on the porch and watched the sky shift from day to dusk. The land was quiet again, not because the danger was gone, but because it had been faced. Seasons passed. One spring morning, Sophia, now older, taller, Stromer, stepped out of the cabin with a branding iron in hand. Red Moon stood beside her as she pressed the mark onto the flank of a young calf. Smoke hissed. The calf kicked once, then bolted into the pen. They watched it run. Neither spoke. Behind them, two crosses stood at the edge of the hill. One worn, one new. The wind carried no sorrow now, only the sound of a ranch still breathing. Some lives are measured not by woods or years, but by what's left behind. A home, a child grown strong, a grave that faces the sun. Some folks save lives without ever saying much, and some little girls grow up to become the women who defend that land. If you believe silence can still speak louder than hate, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of grit and grace.